All right. Hello, everyone. This is the January 4th meeting of Sig-Auth. Happy New Year's. It is now 2023. Wow. Let's get started. Mo, are you around today?
Yep, I'm here.
I hope you're feeling okay.
Yeah, it's all right. I just need like a 1 week nap and then I'll be good.
Yeah. Well, all right. So any plans? Any plans for forwarding additional request metadata to reviews? So I am okay. I guess I will answer this since it is my camp. I am, after implementing this, I was a little bit I was not actually I'm still not sold on how to do caching for this in a way that's reasonable. I think so the general idea of this was, like, if we did want to have additional headers added by like an auth proxy or something such as like IP-based context added to user info for use and authorization. This would allow additional headers to be transferred through to the authenticator and like stored in like the authentication context. The motivation for this was GCP has a feature called context-aware access, where you can do context, you can do authorization based on IP ranges. I think is the easiest example, but it can also be like on like the VPC or virtual network that the request originated at. It could be like, even like something like a trusted device or something. And we needed a way to store additional information in the authentication context to perform authorization rules on it. The challenge that I encountered while trying to implement this is how it interacts with the authentication proxy, and the authentication cache in a way. And I was trying to figure out if there is a way to make the authentication cache still generally efficient while allowing this feature. So that is kind of why I paused it and have not been pushing on it. I guess I would like to hear, does this sound like something that is useful? Why'd you bring it up? Is it because it's rotten and it's about to be closed, or what?
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that, since the bot was harassing it, that if you decided you didn't need it, then we could just close it, and with some explanation of why you decided you didn't need it, and it was the state of it was unclear. Like what you just described was sort of unknown to me.
I'm going to comment that on the bug and let it get closed, or let it remain closed. But thank you for bringing this up. Maybe if it maybe there will be a time in the future where we can prioritize it again and work through some of those problems.
Yeah, that's fair. I had a question for you. So I assume the desire to have this is for one reason or other. You don't want to use an authentication proxy to do this, since the authentication proxy would be able to have the full network details and just embed them into the extra field.
Yeah, that is a good point. That is a very good point. I think that would, I think that's valid. I think whether or not the authentication proxy approach is used, which maybe that makes the most sense here, or this approach is used, there's still challenges with making sure that like the caching is efficient. But yes, I see your point that maybe authenticated proxy would be the right approach without other issues with implementing something like this.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the bar is kind of high. Asking people to write one of those is kind of high.
Yeah, but the bar is high. It is unclear to me whether the requirement here is niche. So I think if the if the requirement is niche, then the bar should probably be high, right? Or I guess it's fine if the bar is high. Not that the bar should probably be high. Is this something that like, is this a capability that anybody else thinks that they would make use of? Does maybe Azure have similar capabilities that aren't supported in AKS?
I don't think we would, other than a proxy, and I guess I'm not Azure, Red Hat. I don't think we would. We would probably.
I mean, I could certainly ask Anish, do you have anything on top of your mind that comes up where we could maybe leverage something like this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm going to leave the tab open. I'm going to explain the problems with the cache and also add problems. Also, auto proxy is likely it's a solution. I'll comment this and then I'll close.
Thanks, Mike.
Cool. All right. Write AD test for subject access review. And
you can skip that. That actually got approved and merged already. So
nice. Okay. Who wants to take this one?
I think I'm here, and I see Tim on the call too. The gist of this was to see if folks agreed with the assessment that we should remove that plugin. I forget if it's deprecated or not. Tim, maybe you can remind me if it's already deprecated.
I don't remember.
But I think the feeling was that we have built far better approaches to doing what this thing was doing, and it's not, so it's got gaps and probably should not be used. I'm trying to remember where the retroactive kept thing came into being. Do folks remember why that was suggested? Was that just to document what it was trying to do and then have a better explanation of why we don't think we need it anymore?
I don't remember the retroactive cap. Normally we do that when there's a like perma beta thing that is wanting to be GA, and we use the retroactive cap just to capture test stuff and upgrade stuff and make sure it's actually GA. If I thought we had marked it deprecated, but I just looked and I don't see any code mentioned, but maybe we mentioned it in release notes. I think we can unequivocally say people should not be using it, because if you're using it to protect yourself, it doesn't effectively protect you. So at the very least, putting a note in, like if you use it, like printing out something saying, you probably don't want to be using this. That seems like a no-brainer. I don't know that it has actually cost us any maintenance effort. I think it just sits there. So it might be worth doing a sweep for like any references in public GitHub to see if we can find any evidence of use. And maybe what we've done in the past is reach out, like file issues if we find use of deprecated things. We did that for the service account token deprecation. Reach out and say, like, do you know that this doesn't work the way you think it does? Maybe a sweep of that. If we can't find any use, or we do find use and we reach out and they say, oh, thanks, we'll switch or stop using it, then that would be a stronger case for announcing deprecated and removing. If we do find use and they say, no, we love it, and here's why, then maybe we could reconsider it and try to understand if it's a reasonable thing to keep around.
So looking at the Kubernetes website docs, there's no indication that there's anything wrong with this plugin. It just looks like a nice first-class plugin right beside like service account.
Yeah, I think as a first step, we should definitely update that that page that I linked in chat and say this is deprecated. Do not use this.
So yeah, updating the code, updating the docs, scanning for use. Those are some concrete things. Maybe we could put that in an issue and tag Sig security and mark it as help wanted for those concrete actions.
I think we have an issue, right? So we maybe we just put the next steps in there.
Ah, there it is. Yep, open in July. Let me drop it into the agenda. Oh, it's already there. Cool. I'll update the description of that to call out these action items and mark it help one.
From the gist of this conversation, I don't see anyone immediately saying, no, I really want to keep this, basically. It's more of let's explore to make sure that our belief that it can be safely removed is correct. And if so, let's do our very graceful dance of slowly removing things. Okay. Are we ready to go to the next thing? Take that as a yes. So this came up during one of the triage meetings. What I was looking for was what do folks believe should happen if you're in your log mode is blocking strict, but then the file that you were writing to gets messed with in a way that you're no longer writing to the file, but because the file descriptor is still valid, there's no errors, but you're just not actually writing logs.
I mean, you're writing logs, just not linked to the file system anywhere. I don't know.
Did we roll our own log handling, or are we using a library?
Oh, we use Logjam, the library.
Or so log rotate, or like the recommendations generally just use like log rotate for the ones that like the log files that we write. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this is just right. The audit policy just write, or audit logs just write to a file. And this is like the standard behavior. If you read a file and you write to it and something else deletes it, the file descriptor remains valid.
Right. And I think if the log mode wasn't blocking strict, I would feel pretty confident saying just, I mean, I don't know, that happens, but it feels really awkward that you set it up in a way. Like I guess the question becomes, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the file remains valid? Is that within the API server's responsibility, or is it the operator to make sure that nobody messes with the host and thus cannot mess with the file?
We're also not doing things like forcing file synchronization after every write. Like I think if you really, really want blocking strict mode, probably use the webhook implementation and implement the semantics there. Feels like the better approach. That said, maybe there's some usefulness to Tim's suggestion to periodically reopen the file. But I'm a little inclined to say that this is like an operator problem.
Yeah, me too. I'm trying to think if there's a valid use case where this would be used. I don't actually know how like if systemd would ever do this.
I think my main concern would be if there was some bug in the like log rotation where like the rotation kind of didn't complete successfully. How would you detect that?
What are the traditional steps for a rotation? Is it like move the existing file and then create a new file at the old location, or is it like copy the existing file and then truncate the existing file?
Yeah, both modes are used. Like usually, like you move the existing file and then send a signal to the process, which causes it to reopen the log files.
I don't think we support the signal thing, right? That's
Yes.
Rotate. That's not what log rotate does though. On Linux.
It's got a copy truncate option. So you like copy the old file and truncate the existing one, and new writes go to the previous existing file.
Push rotate. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so you can also send signals. Okay.
Yeah, but this really depends on like what the definition of audited is, right? Like, and in production, I think like we don't really use log files in this sense. Like you just forward it to a log auditing service. Is that true for most clouds or like production deployments?
I think some deployments use the file as a like a local buffer in case there's a network segmentation or something like that.
It's not unusual to use the file, right? If you're running on-prem and you're not sure, or they don't have a hosted logging environment, it's pretty common to say the next best thing is to write this on disk. But
scraping disk can be totally automated too later on, right? So you don't lose anything.
Yeah, it's a common way people choose to integrate. I don't have really strong opinions about this. Like, it doesn't seem like a high priority bug to me.
I think the question more, is it a bug, or is it just the way the system is supposed to behave?
I would say it's probably not a bug. I would maybe call it an enhancement.
Is there any way to detect lost audit records? Like if I'm looking at the sequence of audit records, can I like see, oh, there's a gap in the sequence numbers here, and I know that some records were lost?
No, we don't
The
have
UID
that.
is randomly generated. I don't think it's a sequence.
You could have a running hash.
Okay.
No, we don't have that.
Yeah, the threat model of someone who has access to the disk, like relatively privileged things on the disk like the audit log, but doesn't have access to things on the disk that could let them mess with the running API server, is a little weird.
Yeah.
Like someone else mentioned, like we don't fsync after every write either. So like there's maybe a variety of things. Like, does the file still exist? Are we fsyncing? Is there a way to detect gaps in the audit log? Like there's sort of a few things around this that maybe could be done. Some of them would take a performance hit. Some of them, like a incrementing sequence on the events a single server emits, maybe wouldn't be a performance hit. But I kind of agree it's a sort of lowish priority enhancement request, like reliably ensure we get all events in the file and sort of bundle those things up into that.
So priority backlog. I don't think there was any. I guess it's between a way more evidence backlog. I don't think there's like. I didn't hear anybody saying that we should not do this. So I'm just going to put backlog.
I think backlog is probably fine. If it's important to someone enough to pull it out of the backlog, I wouldn't object. But yeah, I think someone who wants to see it done would probably need to drive it.
Okay. Anything else that we should add here?
I'll update the description, call out the fsync issue as well.
Yeah. And detecting gaps. I guess the to up level it, just more look at reliability of file based on it syncs. All right, are we done with that topic? I think so. To here.
Yeah, so I'm looking at picking up the CAP 3257 again. And there's two halves to the functionality. One is the API server pieces about accepting trust anchor sets, or whatever we call them now. I think trust anchor sets. And then there's the bit about kubelet actually being able to project them. And I'm wondering, should they be 1 PR, 1 mega PR, or 2 still quite large PRs?
I like 2 still quite large PRs. Yeah, I think re-reviewing changes is a lot easier. The smaller the PR is, it's a lot easier to miss stuff that changed in big PRs.
Okay.
So yeah, I would even, like, if you can, break up the API stuff, like maybe admission separate from the API group and registry stuff.
Is it okay to merge? So basically, what I wanted to avoid was a situation where there was code valid at head that would accept the object, but then like not apply validation or things like that.
I think that is not, I don't know, what do you think, Jordan?
All the API level changes, including validation, should be grouped. The implementation that like makes use of that and actuates stuff based on that can be stacked in a separate PR. But so in an API PR, we have the fields, the definitions, validation. Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, that's
so-
all that's in the first PR. It's just
Yep.
a correct ton of stuff.
Okay.
One
Just
kind of related
yes.
question. Should I include the, so there's also API changes for the kubelet piece, like changing the definition, like adding a new projected volume type. Should that be a separate? Okay.
Yeah, and I would say the admission changes can be separate from the API validation, defaulting, etc. As well. Even though that is also in the API server.
Okay.
So that's like 4 or so PRs. Does that sound good?
We have a lot of buffer when it's alpha, right? Because like we're not gonna get it all done in one release probably. So you have to accept at some point you'll draw a line and say this is the amount of functionality we implemented in the first attempt.
Yeah, you just want you want a particular API and the validation associated with it to be coherent in one PR. So API
Okay.
validation.
I think that's what I have.
Yep.
Maybe I can extract the admission piece to make the PR slightly smaller. I can't, it's been like a month or two since I looked at it, so.
And holidays.
Yeah, we just have so much code gen from like the deep copies and everything else
Ridiculous.
that like when you like I do appreciate when folks put the generated stuff in its own commits, so that way you can look like you should like I like to review it, but I just like to review it separately from like the parts that you hand wrote, just because it tends to be easier to figure out what happened.
Also, Get just released a feature that makes working with stacked branches way easier. So if you have like one local branch, you can push it to like 3 or 4 different remote branches and update 3 or 4 different remote PRs all at once, which is
That would be very
awesome.
helpful.
Ooh, what is this called?
Stacked branches.
Update ref. So you can have a branch that has like 4 refs on it, and then rebase and squash, and then push it to those refs. Anyway,
Add it to my reading list.
yeah.
Awesome.
And actually, I have a API review session that I try to do every other week. And so this is on the list for tomorrow's. If you want, I can send you an invite, and if we want to do any high bandwidth stuff tomorrow, that might be good.
Okay, sure.
Separate mission and separate kubelet side changes. All right. So client exec auth plugin in 127. Nick is on the call. I would really like this to get done in 127, and I'm now going to start focusing on it a little bit more. Yeah, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be available to take some work for it in 127.
Awesome. So
Nick, are you still on leave, or are you back?
No, I'm back.
Okay. I don't like to message people that are on leave. It's kind of mean.
Yeah, so the one technical thing that I wanted to discuss while I had Mo and Jordan in the room is the changes to the upgrades to use the HTTP client rather than the dialer, or a weird dialer thing. What do you want to see to allow that to happen? Because it turns out that it makes the client exec auth plugin far easier to implement.
Do you want to link those and give context, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, I will. Yeah.
I was having a really hard time understanding how a round tripper could give you a base round tripper when it had 2 bases. And it selectively picked one based on the context of the, or based on the type of request.
So the problem that we have today that this attempts to address is that we have, when we do an upgrade from Speedy, for Speedy, and maybe this is true for WebSockets, I can't remember, but definitely for Speedy, we create a request, we dial a connection, and we write the raw request to the connection, and then we parse the response. The problem with this custom code is that it lives independently of, like, the transport cache configuration. Ideally, what we would want to do with this client exec, as per spec in the KEP, is we want to, we can implement this fairly easily by just replacing the base transport. That obviously doesn't work for our Speedy upgrades. It seems possible and fairly straightforward to remove this dialer-based implementation of upgrade requests and switch to just the HTTP transport, which allows us to implement client exec auth plugin just by replacing the lowest transport in the transport cache. That's the motivation for these changes, why it would be nice to land these before beginning the client exec auth plugin work. Otherwise, we are going to make that dialer upgrade stuff much more complicated. And it's already kind of fairly complicated.
Is it possible to make it more complicated?
I was going to ask Mike, as a possibly different approach, I think what you're describing is I just want to change a piece of the round tripper and thus implement it that way. And in order to be able to do that, the Speedy stuff needs to behave nicely with that happening. I think what I had originally tried to do was effectively try to use the HTTP reverse proxy stuff. So instead of changing the client, I effectively changed the server, and then the extra hooks into that transport.
That I think is compatible with what I want, but that reverse proxy stuff doesn't work with our custom dialing, because our custom dialing doesn't use a transport.
So what I was saying is that you would have all of your custom dialing logic stay where it is, and it would make a request. It's just that it makes a request to a different server, right? So it's instead of trying to change the semantics of how the server stuff works in the transport, we just literally changed the request to be a different place altogether, right? So instead of going to API server.aks.com, you go to 127.0.0.1. Literally, that's the server you're going to.
Yeah, I think that is the option where we make the dial stuff a bit more complicated.
Yeah,
it's valid.
Sorry.
I think that would be valid if we are so afraid to touch this stuff that we can't do some simplification. But I think in general, removing that would be beneficial if we can do it carefully and correctly.
I mean, yeah, I generally agree with the notion of trying to come up with some way to simplify this stuff, because it is incredibly difficult to reason about, even if you know what it's supposed to be doing. I guess I think I would ask, how would we validate that we didn't break it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was leading with. Is this an upgrade test for kube control exec? Is it a downgrade test, forward compatible, backwards compatible? What are we? What is acceptable here?
How many of the tests I vaguely remember that we actually had pretty decent test coverage of a lot of different scenarios, but a lot of it was at the unit test level, and I'm not sure how much of that relied on the implementation and had to be ripped out or changed when this changed.
We have E2E tests. I don't know whether they are running in the let me see the E2E tests. I don't know whether they are running in any version SKU suites, but the E2E tests are fairly extensive. The change here was that we removed the Go proxy library because it was actually kind of busted. But like the E2E tests here are fairly extensive. They do execs through HTTP proxies. I think that we don't have an exec through a SOX proxy, but we could add one, and we should also make these run in version suites.
Yeah, the fact that this appears to only be changing the client is promising. Changing the client and the server at the same time is sketchy. I like the idea of simplifying it a lot. It might be worth looking through the history of the speedy round tripper and like seeing when some of the options and things like the ping period and like I'm just looking through the file and seeing some of the options and wondering if we have test coverage of all of those things. So like ping period, keep alive. I know exec, like a long-lived exec, sort of terminating after a minute or some short timeout. The ping period might have been added for that, and we might not have E2E coverage of that. The proxier, HTTP proxy and SOX proxy. So just making sure that we're exercising all of the sort of knobs and levers that the old one had. And then probably sitting down and doing a review like in person so we can talk through each thing that's changing and just make sure we're catching all the balls we're throwing.
Jordan, what are your thoughts on like, so we have the ability to unwrap transports that you can kind of do at the code level. The part that scared me most about this one, I think, was that like you have to make some assumption about like which transport you're going to give back, because you have two distinct transports now. You have a HTTP 2.1 and an HTTP 1 with upgrade 1.
I fixed that. That is not the case anymore.
Yeah, I was looking through it and I didn't see a bifurcated.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So just ignore me then. That doesn't matter anymore.
It looks like a pure wrap now.
Okay.
Yeah. So check it again. I can't remember exactly where. But register protocol is used rather than.
So since David is on the call, David, do you want to like go rewrite the upgrade handling on an aggregated servers so that it doesn't also have that horrendous mess? And
one major proxy transport wrapper rewrite per release, please.
Okay.
I'm willing to obey the one at a time, but I would look at the technique and see if we could simplify it. Although I will admit to being a little gun shy after the CVE to end all CVEs.
Now, David, it was only a 9.8. You had 0.2 left. You gotta see if you can make it.
Yeah. So I'm open to it, but I don't think I want to go for it at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I will follow up. Yeah, with whoever's interested. And then, yeah, once this is in, like, yeah, I'll also talk with, or I guess even before that, I'll sync up with Nick and see what the next steps are for the actual implementation of the meeting parts. And we have till March.
I assume we're all still pretty happy with the idea of using like a proxy-based approach, right? Like no one has since changed their mind and wanted something else. I recently seen like the scheduler folks were like looking at like WASM plugins and stuff. I just wanted to make sure that no one else was like, I want to make a proxy.
I like proxy. I'm still happy with proxy.
Yeah, I still like the idea of it. I haven't followed the discussion closely, but after walking some folks through like the client Go exec plugin thing, the only question would be like invocation of the thing, and are we opening ourselves up to like consuming a kube config that makes stuff get exec? I know there were some concerns around that with the exec plugin. So if this is another mechanism for like spawning a process or doing a thing, it's just worth thinking about how we protect that or inform people of it or how we let people manage that in their environments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in alpha and stuff, we were going to require like an NVAR or something to be set before it would be used, but otherwise it uses the same API as Client Go credential plugins. It is a Client Go credential plugin.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say we are making them more powerful.
But
Yeah.
previously, like the Client Go credential plugin was limited in what it could observe, and now we're sending the request through it. So
yeah, but you could, I think that there's that aspect of it, but there's also the aspect of you have a kube config file that can run arbitrary code that can, daemonize, and at that point, does it even matter if the request is passing through it or not? I think there is a valid security concern here that might not be as addressed as it could be, and I think it probably applies to both the old and the new client exec plugins.
Yeah, like my long-term thoughts around this is I know Sig-CLI is working on like kubectl support. I would like to be able to add like a list of trusted plugins into that kubectl file, and once you have that, then it'll just refuse to invoke anything that isn't one of those. And I think at that point your attack vector is really small. Like just put bash in there and you're kind of good. So that was kind of my thoughts long term and trying to lock this down. And it basically has to move out of the kube config file into a separate place where the user controls it, and it has to be a file that the user doesn't like let other people set. And generally, you probably wouldn't let other people mess with your kubectl file, probably.
Yeah, it's both kubectl path to binary, symlinks in between. It's fairly complicated, but I think there's a lot of exposure there. We should look into it, I think. All right. Does anybody have anything else on this topic? If not, let's move on to our CI stuff.
Was there anything else for 127 that folks were planning to work on that we wanted to mention here for visibility or in case people wanted to be involved. The Who Am I API, I would like to see us promote to beta. I can link the cap. That was very self-contained, and yeah, it's hard to imagine it evolving much beyond the send me my user stanza. Yeah, Tim.
I just wanted to call out the webhook exclusions is something that I'm looking at in 127. I think this falls more under API machinery, but kind of auth adjacent. I have the cap open, I'll drop it in the notes. I'm going to write up an alternative cap to the one that's currently open that looks at using cell predicates instead. But I think some sort of approach in this space is something that I'm hoping to get to alpha in 127.
When you write up that cap, can you be sure to describe which cell variant you plan to use and why? We actually have two now. We have a cell variant for CRD validation, and then we have a cell variant for admission. And even though it's the same cell library, all the bindings, there's a very different set of bindings that can be used. And
is it the like macros?
So there's different variables that can enter it. So like you access an object in CRD validation, you can get the self and the new self. And it's a self and new self that is like part of a schema because you're defining a schema in the same spot. For admission, there is the old, the new, and then a bound policy object. And how those things all intersect is a challenge.
Yeah, admission basically gets the fields that would be in an admission review as variables the cell expression can poke at, and the additional params variable if you configured parameters in your policy.
And maybe also the namespace object.
That's a field in admission review.
Oh, it is?
The namespace name.
Namespace name. Now there is talk about whether we need to allow access to that object. And then there's the secondary ACL check that we've discussed.
That one's still progressing through alpha. Those are the kinds of questions we're going to be asking this release there.
Yeah, but I also think that I would ask very similar questions on this enhancement as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll make sure to cover that in the cap. Just very briefly, like I'm imagining this having access to the full admission review and nothing else. Keep it as simple as possible and lightweight.
All right, and yeah, the other thing was we did drop webhook configuration dynamic admission kubeconfig support for trust bundles, and maybe we will reincorporate that, but I would guess it's unlikely to get that, see that implemented in 127, but maybe the cap will be, the design will be agreed upon.
Mo, do you know if anyone's going to be driving multiple authorization webhooks this release?
I can reach out to Neighborhood and see if he's feeling up to it. When I talked to him at KubeCon, he seemed optimistic because when I described to him like what I wanted from the self stuff in there, he felt a lot better because I think he didn't immediately grok that the schema was effectively static, so you didn't need to do a bunch of stance on this. But I can reach out to him and see if he's gonna work on it. You know.
I'm also planning to maybe introduce a cap, but probably not try to get it landed for 127. That's the dual of the trust anchors. Instead of putting trust anchors into pods, putting certificates into pods.
Are you wanting to at least get it marked implementable, or is it just like you want to have it open this release?
I mean, I'd like to get it fully done and implemented now, right? But
Well,
realistically, probably just start the discussion.
okay.
All right. CF Flix. Yikes. Namespace controller doesn't work in container GCE cause. $498 test failures, 26 today. That is interesting. Exit status 1. And then these okay, these don't look great. Okay, these look a lot worse than usual. Let's see how test grid looks. That is peculiar. So does this indicate that our tests are fine in our test suites and failing in others? So maybe there's something disruptive going on. In the other test suites. I will grab these two and file test flag bugs because they look, or actually no, there are a number of egregious failures.
It looks like there are 4 specific jobs that are failing like hundreds of tests. So the proto, IP alias, slow, and local jobs are just totally red.
Okay. Proto,
Yeah.
alias, slow and local. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'll search for bugs for those test suites, and if there aren't there, I'll maybe file an issue.
Okay.
Maybe ask SIG testing.
Yep.
But ours look stable as usual. Nice work on writing non-flaky tests, everyone. Cool. I think that concludes it for this meeting. Thank you for joining us. Happy New Year's, everyone. I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Well.